I'd like to share a bit more of my story. Sid and Ken worked together for a number of years at a pulp mill, and we were very good friends. We talked a lot about the world and how we felt, that we could help the world if they'd only listen to us. Meanwhile, we lived in a lot of insecurity, and I lived in a lot of unhappiness and a lot of anger. So we got along fairly well. And then came a moment in time where Sydney Banks had this most extraordinary experience that I'd not heard of in contemporary times. And in that experience, he changed in moments. From a man who publicly acknowledged his own insecurity and the desire to have a nicer life. And I saw a man blossom, and his face glowed after this experience. He walked with the presence of true knowledge, adding an element of stature in him that I'd never seen in Sid before. Although he was a kind man and a thoughtful man and very generous in his sharing whatever he had with others in need. He always had that quality. So when he had his experience and shared it with Ken and I, not too long after this, we didn't know what to do with it. It just was so far-fetched, so out of our realm of understanding that we pretty much dismissed it. We had a respect for him, so we didn't say anything to his face. We listened to him, but it just was so far-reaching. It was like a fantasy that he described to us, that he'd found the secret to life. And that thought was one of the most powerful principles with divine mind and divine consciousness. That thought was what really was the rudder in directing humanity in their lives. I didn't get that at all. As time went on and he grew even more with this miracle that had happened to him, and we saw him change more and more, so that even when he went back to work, he was unrecognizable. And I remember when he went to his locker one day, when the first day he went back to work, and he said this to Ken and I, that one of his workmates came up to him and put his hand on his arm as he was reaching to unlock the locker. And they said, "What are you doing going into Scotty's locker? This is Scotty's locker." And Scotty turned around and said, "Don't you recognize me? I'm Sid." So the change was that profound and that dramatic. As time went on and Sid's certainty came out more and more, and he found his voice more and more and spoke in what I thought was a most unusual, perplexing manner, I got frightened. And I would challenge him about talking in this way, like how could he talk like this? He hadn't gone to university. I knew he had minimal education, perhaps grade 9 in Scotland. How could he talk with such certainty? That was such a puzzle to Ken and I, because we knew the man. So how could he say statements such as, "These principles will change the fields of psychology and psychiatry"? How could he make these statements with this limited education? And then as I got more afraid, I would challenge him directly and say, "Well, that's just your opinion." And he wouldn't engage with me. He wouldn't challenge me back. He would just look at me with love and compassion in his eyes and let me challenge him. And actually would grin from time to time, and his eyes would twinkle, and this was disturbing to me. And I discovered that, again, as time went on, that truth disturbs, that inside there was something stirring my soul. After about a year and a half, there was a moment in time when I was very depressed. And I saw Sid and Barb driving up our driveway. And I thought to myself, oh Lord, here come Mr. and Mrs. Pollyanna. And they were the last people I wanted to see. You know what it's like, at least for me, when you're feeling low and out of sorts. I did not want to see some happy people, some contented people. That was too much for me. So I ended up hiding in the bathroom because how we lived was the front door was always left open. We lived in the rural part of the outside the city, and so the usual manner was to knock on the door and come in. So I'm hiding in the bathroom because I just couldn't bear to see these happy people. In my state of agitation, I heard the knock. I heard them come in, call my name. I stayed silent. And then I heard the door close, and something propelled me to go out of that bathroom and beckon them back in. They came in, and I was so distressed that I couldn't even ask them to sit down. And Sid took one look at my face and put his arm around my shoulder and said, "It'll be okay, dearie. It'll be okay." He didn't ask me what was wrong. He just assured me that I'd be okay. And he said something very profound and very spiritual to me. He said, "Elsie," he said, "you have God inside you, as does every living soul on this planet, and you'll be okay." Well, that disturbed me even more. The purity of that message disturbed me even more, and I almost pushed them outside the house. I just couldn't bear to be in that purity of truth that he was standing in and sharing with me. So off they went and got in the car and drove away, and I was absolutely beside myself with what this man had said and the power and conviction with how he said it. So I called a mutual friend, and I just ranted and raved about what had happened. And in the middle of my my raving, she just listened to me, which was very unusual. Normally she would engage and we'd go back and forth. "Well, you know what he said to me, and yes, and he said this, and oh yeah, and you know what I," and on and on. And this time she just listened in silence. And finally she said at the end of my tantrum, she said, "You know, Elsie, you should listen to yourself." And I was highly indignant at this. I thought, there's no sympathy there, and some friend you are, and I promptly slammed the phone down. And then the doors to my own wisdom opened up and allowed me to see a glimmer that I had wisdom inside myself. And I discovered my true self in that moment, and the journey began. And certainly there's been ups and downs in my life. But the certainty that we all have the knowledge we seek inside of us has remained. And I'll never forget that moment where I felt like my life began when Sid said what he did to me. And that's why I encourage people all over the world to read his books and view his tapes, because the words out of his mouth are the purest of wisdom that you'll find anywhere, and that they light and inspire your soul to wake up so that you then begin to hear your own wisdom. So, that's my story. And you all have your story. And enjoy your life. And your life will unfold with more and more wisdom in the simplest, most profound manner.